good morning everyone. Thank you so much for joining our desktop community stand-up. I'm super excited to have amazing guests today. So my name is Olia Gavrish. I am program manager on .NET team focusing on .NET desktop, WPF and WinForms. I have my co-host Dmitry Lyan with me. Dmitry, do you want to
Hey,
introduce yourself?
sure. For anybody that doesn't know me, my name is Dimitri Lylan, and I'm a partner to Olia. I work on the Xamarin Forms team and .NET MAUI, and I also work on lots of XAML tooling for all sorts of developers, including desktop. And I'm just here to be part of the conversation today.
Excellent, thank you. And we have guests from Entity Framework and WPF teams. So, how about you guys introduce yourselves? Let's start with Arthur.
Hi, I'm Arthur Vickers. I'm the engineering manager on Entity Framework, but I'm at heart the programmer on Entity Framework still. Been here for 12 years doing that. I'm very happy to show you some of that stuff today.
Excellent, thank you for joining us. Now we have Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lickness. I'm a program manager on the .NET team, and my focus is data, which is a very large focus. A big part of that is Entity Framework Core, but I'm really interested in all the ways .NET developers interact with data.
Awesome, thank you so much, Jeremy. And we have Primalini from WPF team.
Hey everyone, I'm Pramalini David. I am the new PM on WPF. My team, the desktop ecosystem platform team, recently took over the WPF platform, and I've been working on WinUI all this time, and I've been on the team for about 8 years, and I'm excited about the new investments we're going to be making in WPF.
I'm very excited about it too. Thank you so much for joining, Primalini. So today we will be talking about Entity Framework and WPF strategy, roadmap, etc. But first I wanted to just start it with the new .NET 5 Preview 7 that we just released. And Arthur, if you could share the screen for me. Oh, perfect. Let me go. So this is the blog post by Rich Lander that got just released, announcing .NET 5.0 Preview 7. And if you go down a little bit, there are new things that are included in this preview. One thing that I wanted to highlight is the performance improvements. And Arthur, if you click under performance on performance improvement link, yes, this one, there is a very big and very interesting blog post by Stefan that talks about all the performance improvements in .NET Core, .NET 5, sorry. So check it out if you're interested in that area. That's a very, very interesting read. And with that, I think we can go straight to Entity Framework team and hear about all the new things in this area. Arthur, it's all yours.
Okay, so what the plan is here is I'm going to quickly show you how you can find what's new in EF Core 5, which is shipping the same time as .NET Core 5 in November. Then we're going to look at very quickly just EF Core 101, just if you don't know anything about EF Core, this is how it works. And after that, we're going to switch over to Jeremy, and he's going to show some actual desktop applications, WinForms and WPF using Entity Framework.
That sounds great.
If we get time at the end, I might demo a new feature in EF Core 5, but we'll see how that goes. So this is where I live. This is the EF Core GitHub page, .NET EF Core. And it also is a great place to just get to the documentation. So you can see I'm clicking on the documentation link here. And this is our landing page for all the EF Core documentation. If you want to know what we're working on, releases and platforms is the place to go. And that will take you to what our current releases are, which are LTS and all that kind of good information. And then under EF Core 5, we have both here a high-level plan and a list of what's new. So in the high-level plan, these are the things we're basically doing. Sorry, wrong button. This is what we're doing for EF Core 5. Many-to-many navigations, many-to-many mappings is the biggest feature that we've been working on. It's the most requested feature on GitHub by over 500 folks. And this basically lets you map two collections together without having to explicitly specify the join table. We'll just do the join table for you underneath. Many-to-many navigations is another part of that. We're also doing TPT mapping, which allows you to, instead of mapping different types in your C# hierarchy to a single table, you can map them to a different table, a table per type TPT. We have filtered include that lets you filter what you get back from include, and split include that can make includes much faster. I'm going through this fast because if you're interested, you can go read more on these documentations. We're also doing some stuff around two table and two query to better separate those, and then just some general enhancements down there. In what's new, you'll see lists of all the features that we've released. So as you saw, we've just released preview 7. We always release our previews along with the .NET Core previews. That has some features like DB Context Factory for registering a factory for DB Context in DI. If you're using DI, EF works fine with or without DI. Resetting the state, new pattern for sort generated defaults. There's a lot of stuff in here, and as you go down, you can see in the previous previews we've done things like improved exceptions. We've got community contributions coming in, so you can map IP address directly in your entities now. Lots of good stuff in here. So check this out if you want to see what's new.
That looks impressive. Thank you so much. That's a lot of great stuff.
So yeah, thank you. So let's go and take a quick look now at, this is like the simplest EF Core demo in a sense. So I'm going to just assume that you don't know anything. So EF Core is a way to easily connect your CLR, your C# types to the database, save them in the database, query them from the database, update them. The way you fundamentally do that is you create a class that derives from DB Context. DB Context is the class we ship. And then you have various options here, but the most common thing is to declare sets of the types that you want to store in the database. So in this case, we want to store blogs in the database. So we've created a DB set property of blogs, and we just put that on our context. Then you need to tell EF what database to connect to. There are various ways of doing this. You don't have to do it in the context yourself. You can do it externally. But for the sake of simplicity here, I'm overriding on configuring, and I'm telling EF to use SQLite. So when EF runs, it's going to save all the data in this SQLite database called testDB that I've specified here. So that's my context. To use it, all I do, so this is a simple console app. Jeremy's going to show some actual UI apps a bit later. What I do is I create an instance of my context. Now, you'll see a lot of examples, especially in ASP.NET Core, where this happens in a DI container and you actually resolve the context from DI. You don't have to do that. DI can be intimidating. It's not necessary for every application. So perfectly valid and fully supported to just new up your context like this. You do need to dispose it because it maintains the connections to the database. So we need to make sure that those get closed appropriately, as well as other reasons. Normally, when you're managing a database schema with EF, you have a variety of choices. You can either have an existing schema in a database and reverse engineer that to a DB context, or you can have EF create the schema for you. So when EF creates the schema for you, it's basically going to look at the types that you have, the blog and the post in this case, and it's going to say, okay, I need an ID property, I need an ID column for the ID, I need a name column for the name property, and so on and so forth. You do that with migrations, which allows you to generate a migration which has the SQL to update or change the database schema as necessary. However, if you're just doing testing or prototyping or trying stuff out, you can just have EF do that for you automatically. So what I do here is I ensure the database is clean from last time. I don't care about saving anything because this is just for testing, and then I create it again. If you look in our documentation page, there's a section on testing with EF Core that goes into doing this kind of thing in a lot more detail. So basically now we've created a context and we've told the database, make sure it doesn't exist, the database that we want to talk to, so that it's clean to start with. And then we said, now create it. So it's going to create an empty database with that schema in it. In fact, if we switch on simple logging, which is a new feature in EF Core 5, you can do a very simple log thing in your options, which just says, okay, send the logging to console write line. If I run this application, you'll see down here, when we look at what's happening, some queries from later on in the application, but here we've actually created the table post. So this is what migrations would normally do, and we created a table of blogs, but this is actually happening here because we called ensure created. So we have a database, and then we tell EF, okay, I want to insert some stuff into that database. So I'm going to say add range, which means add a bunch of entities to the database. Each blog I'm creating with a name, and then I'm giving it a list of posts. So this will mean that each blog will be related by a foreign key. Each post will be related by a foreign key to this blog in the database. So you're basically creating this with the relationships and saving them. Save changes is what tells EF to actually take these changes, in this case, these inserts, and write them to the database. Then you can get rid of that context. It's not all the data stored in the database now. Create a new one, and then we have just this code that print blogs that will read the blogs from the database, also bring back the related posts, and then write them out. So if I remove the logging down here so we can see the output more clearly, you can see that when we run that, it prints out the blog and the post that we saved in the database. So that's basically EF Core from in a nutshell, a one-on-one. That's what EF Core does. That's what it's for. If there's any questions on that, we can ask them, and if not, we can move on to Jeremy's demos, which show WinForms.
That is awesome demo. Thank you so much. We have one question. I'm not sure if that is for you. That says, can you use new C# syntax for using brackets context without brackets?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
I'm not doing it here because I have two blocks. See, I have one using block and another using block there. If I were to remove this, actually, then I could very easily just go here and change it to the new syntax like that, and everything would be fine.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we have some comments about WPF. Thank you so much, guys, for that. Keep them going. We will talk about WPF after Entity Framework, but please post. I read everything, and I will read it out loud for Primalini. All right. So now I think, Jeremy, do you want to share something with us?
I do.
Excellent.
Let me let this pull up. So one of the things that we're very focused on moving forward is ensuring that the experience for EF Core is first class across different platforms. And so what I'm going to show you here is building on what Arthur shared. And this is a WinForms app. So it's a Windows desktop app targeting Net Core 3.1. And it's using Entity Framework to create a UI to build this. And I want to show you just some of the pieces. So I've defined a very simple category. So there's a category and a name, and notice I'm using an observable collection list source. So this is something that's provided by Entity Framework Core to handle the two-way data binding that's inside of WinForms app. So instead of having to cast or build your own proxy, for example, this will automatically do all that change tracking for you. Similarly, we have a product that references back up to a category. So this is a navigation property. So if I have a product, I can navigate into the category. And what's nice is this is set up to lazy load. So it'll basically pull back one of the entity sets and only load the other one if you access it. My product context, this is what establishes my connection to the database, shows categories and products. We're using SQLite, and again, this could just as easily be SQL Server, but to keep the example simple and self-contained, I'm using SQLite because it just creates a local file. And I'm using these lazy loading proxies. These are what detect when you're trying to access a navigation property and pull them in. So that is all it takes for me to set up my database portion of this. If we go into the form, I made a very simple form, and I'm kind of showing why I'm more of a developer and not a designer. But I've got categories at top, products, and a save button here. And then if we look at the code behind for this, I've basically got my product context. When the forms load, I create one. I'm making sure that database is created. Now, unlike Arthur's, I'm not starting fresh each time, so I'm not deleting it and creating it. I want persistence between sessions. I'm loading the categories, and then I'm just using a binding source. So that data source right here uses this entity framework extension method to turn it into a binding list. That's pretty much it. We've got our save button that validates and calls save changes and then refreshes the views. So let me go ahead and run this and show you what the experience looks like. Give it a second here, should pop up shortly. So now I have my fancy form, and I'm just going to do some categories. We'll do food, we'll do water. That's okay, I didn't spell it right. We'll do dessert. And then for water, actually, let's make this drink. Let's do a couple drinks. We'll do soda, we'll do water, we'll do shake. And then for food, let's add a couple entries. We'll do pizza and burrito. And then we'll save it, and you can see our IDs populate. We can navigate back through these. Let's go into the drink. Let's say we don't want water, too healthy, save that. And now you can see that we've round-tripped and updated the database. So that's the WinForms experience, and really what I'm trying to show is just how straightforward it is to be able to build a context and wire it into your WinForms app. Now, having said that, another example of a platform experience is WPF. This is a WPF. Oh, go ahead.
Interrupt you. Can we go back to the WinForms app and talk? I have a few things I want to mention. That's possible.
Yes, that is very possible.
So one thing that Jeremy mentioned is how the IDs were populated automatically. So I think it's useful to understand what EF is doing under there and kind of the best practices with EF. So you really don't want to manage your primary key and foreign keys yourself in EF. You want to use these navigation properties like we saw with blogs and posts and with categories and products in Jeremy's example, where you connect them up. And then you let EF generate the IDs for you. And in fact, it's not EF that's really generating the IDs, it's the database. So what happens when EF saves those things to the database is that it asks them to, the database is asked to generate a key for the new inserted row. So this is like a SQL Server identity column, or other databases have similar. And then the database then sends that back to EF, and then EF knows that's the new ID. It connects it up to all the foreign keys and everything before saving those. And so in effect, what you end up being able to do is manage your object model without worrying about the keys and the foreign keys at all, which I think is one of the big advantages of EF. And if you find yourself in EF having to worry about those keys, then probably take a step back and ask yourself why, because it's often easier to it's easy to get into a state where you're not sure what you're doing and you just set keys and things, and then you're really fighting against EF rather than working with it. One more thing I want to point out, if you can go to the main designer page, the code behind. Yes, there. So scroll down to the initialize. Oh no, the form load, that's right, the form load. So there's a couple of things that are going on here that are interesting in terms of the data binding scenario. So the EF context, when you query or you attach things or add them to the context, it starts tracking the state of those entities. So it knows what values have been added, what values have changed, and can do automatic database updates. What we're doing here is when we do context categories load, that is apparently we've gone to build. Context category load is loading into the context all of the categories in the database. And then when you connect the binding list to it, that means it's going to feed those changes that you make in the app back into EF. And because EF is already doing that tracking of changes, when it sends the update to the database, it's only going to update the things that have actually changed. So there's a very tight connection, tight integration here between what you're changing in the UI and the things that are marked as tracked in the database, such that you can very easily just say, right, I've made all those changes, do the update. those are the two things I wanted to talk about.
Nice,
Awesome.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
And the WPF app should be pretty easy to show because if we look at, did I close my WP? No. What am I doing? This is kind of funny. Netcore app. Okay.
That is your
So this is my WPF app. Yeah. And so this is a Netcore app 3.1. We can see I designed it similar, although I learned from prior experience and moved the save button here. That was my design decision. But I do want to show that product is the same, category is the same, and our product context is the same. So exact same setup. I could easily have this in a shared library that I share between my WPF and my WinForm application if I wanted to do that. This time in the code behind for the main window, I've got my product context. And then in the XAML, let's show XAML here, 1 second. In the XAML, I've defined some resources here. I've got 2 collection view sources. One of them is the category, and the design time's having some issues, but that doesn't keep it from working and running. The second basically takes the products and binds up to the category. So this is showing products for the currently selected category. Then we've got our regular data grids and our save button. So we're doing a very similar thing. I'm basically, when it's loaded, I'm ensuring the database is created. I'm loading it, only this time I'm using the extension method to observable collection because WPF uses the notify property change, so it's going with the observable collection instead of the binding list source. But that is the only real change here. When we click the button, we save the changes. Entity Framework Core is smart enough to understand that I've modified a field, maybe changed the name, that I've removed a field, I've added a field, and it will just gather those changes and push those out to the database. And then I'm just refreshing my grid. And then at the end of it, I'm disposing everything. So let me run this and show you what that experience looks like. And I love this hot reload, by the way, with WPF in the designer. I was literally working on that as I was designing these grids and fields. So let's do food, drink, dessert. We'll come up to drink. We'll do water, soda, shake, kombucha. And then we'll save that. And same thing, we get IDs for all of these. We can navigate off the food to drink. Let's say I decide I don't want the shake. I'll highlight this row. I'll delete it. I'll save it. And Entity Framework Core has removed that. So that is what I wanted to show is these 2 experiences. Now our documentation right now has get started scenarios for console apps, for ASP.NET Core apps, and for Xamarin. We just added Xamarin. These reference projects will be added to a getting started for WinForms and for WPF. And we're also working on Blazor, both server and WebAssembly. So we should have a complete list of documentation here over the next few weeks that covers end-to-end scenarios across all platforms.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Let me see.
So if there are
Go ahead.
If there are questions on that, we can ask those. If not, I'll go back and show my EF Core 5 app, which shows indexer properties, a new feature.
I actually was just about to ask about that. So go ahead.
Okay, let me share again.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're back in exactly where we were before. This is where I left off before Jeremy started. Now, we could, if we wanted to, let's say, extend this model, we could add a new public, sorry, if I can type. Let's say we want a created time. So we'll create a date time property created on. I'm making these all just public properties with getters and setters. You don't have to. You can use read-only properties, initialize them in constructor, and all that kind of good stuff that EF will still understand and be able to do that. So I can do this, and I can now start using this. I could add things here to date times and everything. But let's say I'd ship this application to a customer, and they wanted to actually, I was shipping it as a library rather than an application, and they wanted to extend the library. Previously in EF Core, one of the limitations was you had to be able to modify the actual CLR type in order to add a new property to it. So even if you could modify the database to add a date time created on column, if you weren't able to actually change the CLR type, then you couldn't get that new column in the database. So you could do that by allowing people to extend the types, derive from the mag columns and stuff. In EF Core 5, we've made that easier by allowing indexer properties. So instead of defining this directly as a date time, I can put in here a indexer property for, let's see, I might have the code snippet. Yes. So rather than write this all out live, let me just post this on there so you can see the change. So what I've done here, sorry, I was supposed to do it in my post, and I've started to do it in my blog. So let's do it in the post where I was supposed to do it in the first place. There we go. So what I've done here is I haven't added any specific property. I've added a backing field of a dictionary. And this is just a string to object. You don't have to use to object. If you know you're always storing strings, it can be string to string. If you're storing ints, it can be string to int. String to object lets you store anything. And then I've added an indexer property on here. So this is an indexer property where if I pass it a name, it's going to try and get that name out of the dictionary or set that name into the dictionary. So I can now pass this to the other application developer and take this out of my library. They still have to tell EF that there is a property that they want mapping in there, which is done in this model builder. This is the fluent way to map entities. So we can do entity post here, and then we can tell it has an indexer property. So this is what I would do. So because we have that indexer property on the actual entity type, I can now say, okay, what I want to do is I want to store a date time in that and call it created on. Now, this doesn't require me to change my post type at all. So any application can extend this and just say, add this indexer property. So we've done that. If we now run and create the database, what we'll actually see, hopefully, is that it creates a property for that when we create the database. So I'm running with the logging on again. Oh, it didn't, failed, but it still created the database because I haven't updated the rest of the code yet. So you can see in the database now we've got a created a column. It's text in SQLite. In SQL Server, you'll see date time 2 by default. SQLite has a very limited type system, so date times are stored as text by default. You can change that in EF Core. You can tell it to store them in different formats, and it will. But you can see that even though we don't have that created on property in my post class, because we have an indexer property and we put it in here, we now have that index property in the database. I could replicate this line and do another one. I could say, okay, we also want a modified on, for example. And that's fine, that code will work. I want to show a quick tip here that a lot of people seem to miss, which is you don't have to repeat yourself quite that much. You can do this, what we call the nested lambda syntax, where I take these things and I put the first one in here, and then I can also do another operation on the same entity type. So instead of me having to type the entity type post twice, do entity post twice there, I've only actually done it once, and then I'm saying, okay, I could do lots of operations on that. So it's kind of a shortcut rather than doing model builder.entity.post.property, model builder.entity.post.property, and so on over and over again. For the rest of this demo, I only want index property, so I'm going to remove that. And this will still work, but you can go to the other syntax, obviously. So we can actually now initialize these properties. We can do this indexer property syntax. So I can say, okay, I want to put created on. I'm going to save created on here, and I want it to be date time now. Okay, so we'll do that for all of these. We'll just all of the entities that we're inserting, we're now going to insert a created on date time now. Okay, so hopefully when I run this, it won't crash this time because we're actually saving things into the properties. Indeed, it didn't. So what you can see here is on the inserts. So it's doing insert values into post blog ID, and it's using my created on. And because I put sensitive data logging, by default, EF will not output in any of the logs any of the values from your database because that could be sensitive data. However, when you're debugging, it's very useful to see those. So that's why we have this enable sensitive data logging. If I went to the top of here, you'd see a warning in the log saying that we've got this on. But what we can see is the actual parameter values here are the parameter values for date time now. And those are actually being stored into the database. I didn't read them out yet, but if we go to our print blogs, it's very easy for me to just add in here created on and then do post created on. So I can now get this out of my entity just by accessing the index property. I could do that in a query too. I could say where created on is greater than this or less than that, and that would still work. When we look at the output of this, if I run it again, we now see that the output down here, we have the created ons being accessed from the index property. So that's something that we're putting in EF Core 5.0. It's primarily there because this is actually the way many-to-many work under the covers. We effectively create entities that are dictionaries that have the information that you're in so that they don't need to be specified. But because we built this in a kind of componentized way, you're free to create your own indexer properties and use them in your own way, which can be very useful if you want to extend existing metadata in this way.
Excellent.
That's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the demo. That looks very exciting. And we had a few questions, but we already had answers in the chat. So Emily were asking about CRUD templates, and Jeremy responded that we have tutorials. All right, then Arthur, if you want to stop sharing the screen,
yep,
so we can see all you guys again. All right. Alex is asking, I mean, CRUD example in the templates of the WTS, maybe WPF.
Template Studio, I guess.
Oh, Template
Windows
Studio.
Template
Windows
Studio.
Template Studio, yes.
Windows Template Studio, yeah.
Do you guys know?
I'm not aware of anything.
I think I'm familiar with that. That's like some add-on templates. I think they're...
Yeah, so Windows Template Studio, it helps you create new projects in Visual Studio that are WPF, UWP. I think there's potentially Xamarin support, but basically it's like a nicer file new project experience that has complex features. You can integrate MVVM patterns using Prism or some other library, for example, so that your new project has all of that built in. So I guess that's the form of the question, right, folks on the chat, that it'd be nice to have a checkbox to start adding entity framework capability there.
Yep.
I like it. Yeah, we have some really great templates for ASP.NET Core and even ASP.NET, but having those for desktop experience is definitely something I think would be great.
Yeah, so Clint Rutkiss is the PM. He'd be a great person to chat with, Jeremy, if you guys have ambition.
Sounds good.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you, chat. Good question.
We have another question from Gentura. Question for WPF WinForms binding. If database is slow in response because network or disk speed, wouldn't that block the UI since it's not async?
So in the spirit of very simple demo examples, I used a synchronous connection because it's a local SQLite, but Entity Framework Core exposes all of the asynchronous methods. So there is a save changes async and a load async, etc.
Right.
Yeah, in any real world app that has those kind of concerns, definitely we should architect to the technology. I think for the demo was perfect. Even like I would build a simple app since SQLite is local. Some of those concerns are not there unless the SQLite itself becomes really big or complicated.
But it's good to put a note on the beginner documentation about that. So Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, thanks. Right. Are there plans to make .NET Core able to compile via LLVM?
Nope, nobody here to
Great.
talk about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, great question for the compiler team.
Yeah. Could you mix identity and WPF?
That is a great question.
What is meant by identity?
I think identity server for authentication.
Yes, you can
and
do
that.
that.
I do not know.
Yes, you can do that. We've shown some of that in the past. I don't think we have any current samples, and I don't know who's tried it recently, but we can follow up on that because we should show how to use that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect. Thank you guys for all the questions. And keep posting the questions. We can always go back to Entity Framework, but meanwhile, I think we can transfer to WPF. Primalini, go ahead, take the stage.
Sounds good. And Julia, I guess you are going to be projecting the page.
Yes, good.
So as Julia gets started, folks, to show you the roadmap, once again, I'm Primalini David. I'm a new PM on WPF. My team, the developer ecosystem and platform team, recently took ownership of WPF. We are the same team that also owns WinUI and React Native. And so now a single team owns all of the UI frameworks and the investments that go in there. And we are going to be ensuring that there's consistency in the different investments made across the UI frameworks. So with that, let's take a look at the roadmap.
All right. Actually, I think I will have to ask someone else to share it. So, Dmitry, if you could
I'm
go.
On it.
There's too much of a software going on my machine.
No problem.
Dmitry, if you could go to WPF GitHub repo.
Great.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. So Dmitry, if you'd like to zoom in ever so slightly to the table on the page.
Sure.
So folks, for fiscal year 2020-2021, my team is committed to the investments that you see in the table, investments in WPF. So starting off, the first one, incorporating .NET Framework servicing fixes into .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5. This is something that was started by the earlier team that owned WPF, and when my team took over, we're essentially continuing on that work, and this is ongoing work, and it will go on through the year. The next one is ongoing integration with .NET 5. We have done most of the work. I want to say maybe about 70% of the work. So we will have this done and wrapped up fairly soon. As we get closer to wrapping this up, I will refine the target delivery column in this table to indicate when exactly this is going to be completed. Number 3 on this list, building out test infrastructure to add tests to validate and merge community PRs. Now, this is something that we have heard from you, the community, loud and clear, and we are actively working on making this happen so that we are able to enable the community to contribute directly, merge PRs directly once we have our test suites available publicly. So this is a heavy duty investment for us. We're working on this in 20H2. We already have a dedicated developer for this particular work item. The fourth one on this list is accessibility updates to .NET 5. Now, there are certain accessibility bugs as well as features that we need to add in order to meet the government stipulated accessibility guidelines in the various countries where your apps run. And this is something that is a priority for us, and we are going to take this up in 21H1. And the last item there, but not the least, is ARM64 support. As you are aware, Microsoft, is investing in new devices, ARM64 devices, and we look forward to having your apps running on those devices. And therefore, WPF ARM64 support is an important one for us, and we are going to be taking that up in 21 H1 as well. Once again, as we get closer to the preview timelines, I will be updating this table with more refined target delivery dates. I will be also sharing that same information with you on calls such as this, so please stay tuned. So now if we want to scroll down a bit, Dimitri, I would like to talk about our SLA for the plethora of GitHub issues, good issues that we have. Now, for all new issues that are filed after July 10th, we have a SLA of 72 hours. That is within 3 working days, we will triage those issues. However, that does not mean that all of the good issues that were filed prior to July 10th would not be looked at. In fact, we have a team of 4 developers come PM who are actively triaging the 500 or so issues that are currently on GitHub to bring those counts down. So you will see questions coming back from us on the issues that you may have filed earlier. We come back to you with questions, clarifications about a certain issue, and that will show you that we're actually actively triaging to bring our counts down on that front. In terms of the pull requests that you have submitted, now we are committed to selecting at least 1 or 2 PRs per month to merge into the framework. Now, the criteria for selection of a PR is the bulleted list that you see there. I'll read it out. It's recency. The next is the extent of reactions, which may be likes, comments, the thumbs up, heart sign, so on and so forth. The next is fixes to existing issues. That is, it's not a new feature, it's an existing feature. The next is complexity of the fix in itself. Then we have breadth of the impact of the fix, how widely it is going to be impactful to the apps in the ecosystem today. The next is low potential for regression. The next is has adequate test coverage. The potential for regression is also tied to the adequacy of test coverage that we have. And the last one is that it's not a new feature request. Now, it does not mean that if you have filed a PR for a new feature, that we would not consider it. The only thing is that at the moment, for the moment with our current number of resources, our team is committed to the list that you see here. As the months go by and as we are able to better resource and staff our team, we do expect this list to get refined a little more, at which point we will be able to accept new features. We also expect that our test suites would then be available publicly to you, and you would be able to merge PRs directly. The next topic I wanted to touch to is about the non-code PRs. These are documentation bugs, documentation issues. Now, the SLA for this too is 72 hours for all new PRs filed after July 2020. The next one, community calls. So I do expect to be on community calls such as this at least every other month. I will also be on the WinUI community calls, giving you updates on the progress of the work in the investments that you saw in the roadmap. In addition, we are definitely looking forward to your questions, your feedback on the investments that we're making. So I do expect to see you all on these community calls every other month. Last but not the least, resourcing. The resourcing topic heavily influences the extent and the depth and breadth of the investments that we make in WPF. Our team's management has approved the additional resources that our team needs. It just so happens that this global COVID pandemic has caused our hiring to be slower than usual. And so as we combat this pandemic together, and more specifically, as we overcome this pandemic together, I do fully expect that our hiring will get back to speed, and we will be able to hire the required resources for our team for this project. And as and when that happens, we will be refining the roadmap with the investments, probably newer investments, some additional investments that we could make for the coming fiscal year. That brings me to the end of the roadmap, and I'll hand it back to Olia, or I would love to answer questions from folks on the call.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Primalini. And we got a lot of questions, and you did a great job already answering them. So there were questions about the staffing. Is someone working full-time on WPF? People were asking to explain why PRs were blocked for the last year. I don't know, you already talked about it. If you want to add anything to that, go ahead. If not, we can go through other questions.
Nothing new that I haven't already mentioned. Again, we just took over WPF. I won't be able to speak to what the earlier team did or did not do, but now that we have taken over, do expect that you will hear from us. We have a team with limited resourcing, but we are 100%, whoever's on the team is 100% on this project. And you will be hearing from us on the GitHub repo.
Right, thank you. And there were some questions about milestones. How does the SLA related to Microsoft bot automatically closing issues due to no recent activity? If not, shouldn't you remove or rename the milestone to avoid confusion? Oh, sorry, the old WPF team has marked some issues with the milestone 5.0. What is the current target for the 5.0 release? Are you still using that milestone as a guideline?
That's a good point. As we triage the issues and the PRs, we are adding some additional labeling that is not camouflaged in some internal terminology. So I am going to actually revisit the label about the milestone 5 and make sure that it's more descriptive. Apologies that between the earlier team and our team, we haven't really had an opportunity to look at the labels, to look at the milestones and scrub them correctly, but we'll get on top of it.
Perfect, thank you. There was a suggestion from Sharfuddin for Entity Framework Core to suggest stored procedures executing EF Core. I'm sure Jeremy and Arthur will take a look at that. Dot Morton,
yes,
yeah, go ahead.
Store procedures is a big area. You can definitely call store procedures. We've improved the mapping in EF Core 5. There's still some more work to be done in that area, but you can use them.
Perfect. Yeah, and we get a comment about that after a year of silence, any goodwill, enthusiasm for community engagement has faded. It's good that there will now be someone running the project, but the fact that it was abandoned without any communication for so long is staying on the project, yeah, fortunately. And Morten Nielsen is here yelling at us, just merge my PRs, they work.
They work.
Getting there, Martin, getting there. We hear you loud and clear, and I have your list with me as well.
No testing is needed for Morten. Perfection by default. All right. Any more questions, guys? Go ahead. He tested it. Okay, it worked on his machine.
Ship it.
Ship
It
it.
compiles.
Yeah. There were kudos to Telerik, and I want to join that. That is amazing control vendor and our dear friends. We have bi-weekly calls with them for WinForms, and they do absolutely amazing job. They're greatest people. I had a chance to meet them in person when I was in the conference, and yeah, it's a pure pleasure working with these guys. All right. Any more questions? Let's give it a minute, and if not, I think we can call it a day. How's the weather for you guys? Primalini, I know you're in India, right? Is it hot?
Yes, and it's surprisingly cooler than usual. Less traffic on the roads, less pollution, and so it's really nice outside. The only difference it's completely dark outside. It's nighttime for me. It's 11:30 in the night.
Thank you so much for joining us that late. Wow, that is a
that's
commitment. Thanks, we really appreciate that. And Alex has a comment. I hope Microsoft.expressions.drawing will soon be open sourced as NuGet package.
Yep, there's no plans to work on that at this time. How is WinUI and .NET MAUI looking to align? It's a early days for both projects. I would say stay tuned. We'll have more on that when we're ready.
And yeah, we've heard the request to put priority on assembly load context issue 1700. That is a nice number. Thank you for the feedback. All right. Is any one of us is familiar with crypto API, as it is kind of cross-cutting concern? Well, that really depends. What you can ask the question, and then we can find the answer, find the person who is familiar. You can tweet us or send us email. Okay, Alex. So Microsoft Expression Drawing, Alex is asking, will it not be available for .NET Core, Dmitry?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything happening with that assembly at this time. If there's desire to make something available that was shipped as part of Blend previously to .NET Core, I would say file a VS feedback ticket is probably a good place to start.
And I saw earlier there were questions about WebView 2. So WebView 2 is supported for WinForms and WPF for .NET Core and .NET Framework. I posted a link. We have a docs on getting started for WinForms, for WPF. That is the link, but right there you can also find getting started for WinForms as well. And that is a new Chromium-based controls. We are very excited to have it. All right, so that question, why is X509 certificate 2 finalizer not clearing up crypto containers? I don't know.
Yeah, we're going to have to find someone for that one.
Yes, but we'll try to find someone. All right. I think that is it for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Thank you, our dear guest, for joining us. Primalini for joining in the middle of the night. We really appreciate it, and super excited about new WPF roadmap strategy. Hopefully we'll get all the PRs merged, especially Morton, because he yells the loudest. And yeah, super excited about all the news in Entity Framework Core world. Thank you, Jeremy and Arthur, for joining us. And
You're welcome.
thanks, guys. Keep your questions
Thank
going.
you.
I will see everyone in a week, in a month. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.